What's happening, guys and girls? Acrinator here, and welcome to this special video made in celebration for the channel recently reaching 100 subscribers. In this video, I'm going to be giving you a behind-the-scenes look at how I make the episodes for my series World of Warcraft Dungeon Overview. Aside from the Path of Exile review and the Diablo 3 Unanswered, this is the most consistently popular series on my channel, and besides the podcast, it takes the most editing. All of the other series I make use similar concepts with how I organize, record, and edit them, so you should have a pretty good idea of how I do what I do by the end of this. Also, a quick warning, this video is probably going to be a bit longer, so I completely understand if you don't care and stop watching now. For those who are interested in this, I'll have timestamps in the description denotating the start of each major section in the production process. So with all of that out of the way, let's dive straight into it. As with just about every video I do, I start off by writing a script. I start off with the lore of the bosses and the dungeon overall, where I reference both the dungeon journal in-game and the WoW wiki page for the instance. Once that's out of the way, I go find the closest flight path to the dungeon and find the most efficient way to get to the entrance. After the script is finished, it's time to record the audio, because the length of the video footage I'll gather later on is dependent on how long the audio is for each section. For audio recording, I have a blue Snowball Ice microphone with a standard pop filter propped up on the box for my headset, and a blanket covering the back of my chair and over the top of my monitor. This creates a small sound booth, so to speak, which drowns out a decent amount of the unwanted noise. I make sure to shut my door and close my windows while recording in order to stop as much noise as possible. Obviously my setup isn't professional, but I think I managed to get a pretty good sound out of it. The rest of the recording process is simple since I'm just reading my script off the monitor right in front of me. I record my stuff in Audacity, which is a free recording software, and I set the basic properties of the tracks to mono at 48,000 Hz. This just saves space compared to recording in stereo, especially since MP3 files export at a max of 48,000 Hz, so anything higher would just be excessive. I take my script paragraph by paragraph since I usually screw up and invalidate the recording if I try to read any more than that at one time. Once I have all the tracks recorded, it's time to edit. My editing process is relatively simple, and I'll list the basic steps for you on screen as I describe them. You can also see a sped up version of me editing the audio for the video you're watching right now in the background. First, I highlight about a second of the audio during the beginning of the track where I purposefully stay quiet to capture the ambient noise in the room. Then I get the noise profile, highlight the entire track, go to noise reduction, then I go to equalization bass boost, equalization treble boost, Spitfish de-esser, which is a plugin that I'll link in the description for anyone interested. Then I compress the file a few times to make the peaks of the audio more uniform, and finally I normalize the track to somewhere around -1 to -3 decibels. I've heard of some other methods to use to get good sounding audio, but this is a method I've used for a while now, and I like the way my final audio sounds. After the first track is edited, I'll go through and cut out all the breaths and pauses to make everything as smooth as possible. This works most of the time well enough, though sometimes it's obvious, to me at least, that it was edited. Regardless, I hate the way my breath sounds, so it's worth it to me. Once the first track is done, I move on to the other tracks in the recording one by one. Supposedly there are ways to edit multiple tracks at once, but I've found that it doesn't sound quite as good as tending to each individually. After all of that, I just export the audio files into my folder and move on to the next segment of preparing for the video. Now that the audio is done and I can see how long the footage has to be to complement the audio, I go back into the game to start recording. For the most part, I use Shadowplay by NVIDIA to record gameplay footage and OBS to record my desktop. The footage that stands to introduce the bosses, their fight mechanics, and how to get the dungeon's entrance is pretty self-explanatory on how to do that. I'm sure what a lot of you are curious about is how I do the panning effect that you're watching now. For this, you won't need any special add-ons or anything like that, just a few console commands that are in the game by default. I'll put them up on the screen here, just make sure to add the spaces where necessary, and where the number sign is, you input a number that will represent seconds. What these commands do is set it so that it will take X amount of seconds for the camera to move from point A to point B, where X is the number you put in for the console command. In order to set the positions for the camera angles you want, you'll need to go into key bindings, down to camera, and look for the save and set camera views. I only use 2 for Dungeon Overview, but you can use as many as 5 if you'd like. I have them set to control plus either 1, 2, 4, or 5 on the number pad. 4 and 5 set the position of the camera, and 1 and 2 tell the camera to move to the corresponding number directly above it on the number pad. The way you set different positions is to have your character stand still and move your view with your left mouse button only. If you move it with the right mouse button, this won't work. Make sure to set the positions to different angles, and once that's all set up, just take Control 1 or 2 to move the camera to the desired position. You can also double tap Control 1 or 2 to immediately move the camera to the desired position without any of the panning. With the more recent Shattered Halls episode, I actually used my new video editor that I paid for through Humble Bundle, but for the purpose of this video, I've saved the raw footage that I've gathered, and I'll be showing you the basics effects of how I used to do it with VSDC's free video editor. I figure showing you this with a piece of software that you could actually use for yourself is more useful. For the intros and outros to all my videos, I have pre-rendered clips that I just add in to make my life easier, and the majority of clips added are adjusted to fit however long the audio is. One trick I always use while recording video is to make it at least 5 seconds longer than the audio it's accompanying to make sure I won't run short. The effects are actually minimal for the most part, being simple fade transitions and push effects. I'm not going to go into the nitty-gritty here, but if there's a demand for it, I could make a tutorial in the future for VSDC and how to do some of the effects I do. The things that really stand out in the editing would be splitting and speeding up the parts where I show you where the dungeon entrance is, and splicing in clips during the boss fights to showcase specific mechanics. Once the audio and video segments are all in the timeline appropriately, I make sure that the video clips are all muted. Then I add in the last layer, which would be the background music. I've bought a few songs from each of WoW's soundtracks on iTunes, and that's what I use for the background music for this series in particular. It can vary depending on each individual track, but for the most part I decrease the volume of these tracks by about 20 decibels. Likewise, if a track is cut off because the video is ending before it does, I just do a simple fade out for that. Then I just type in the comment question in the outro section, render the video, and I'm pretty much done at that point. I always make sure to watch the rendered video file before uploading it to YouTube to see if there's anything simple that I messed up on, but for the most part I usually don't find anything. And that's all there is to it. The average amount of time varies depending on how long the dungeon is, but I'd say that script writing can take about 1 to 2 hours, recording and editing the audio can take about 2 to 3 hours, recording the video can take about an hour, and editing the final product can take anywhere from 1 to 4 hours. Of course, most of that is sectioned off into different days. I usually write these scripts well in advance. For example, I'm currently in mid to late Wrath in terms of progress there. Recording the audio is usually done later at night, and editing the audio and everything else is usually done in one day at that point. For any aspiring or current content creators out there, my message to you would be just try your best and constantly look for ways to hone your craft. Dungeon Overview is the first series I started on my channel that wasn't a simple Let's Play, and you can really see the quality increase over time. The first episode I ever did back in November of 2014 is incredibly low quality compared to what I do now. Eventually, I learned how to organize my video footage, and then how to edit my audio, and then how to edit the video to be better at visually explaining things as I'm talking about them. I didn't improve to the quality I have now overnight. It took years of tinkering around with my style, and don't be afraid to take advice from your comments. That's where I got quite a few ideas for how to make my stuff better. But I think that's enough preaching for one day, so I hope you enjoyed this long ass behind the scenes. If you did, feel free to give it a thumbs up. Links for my social media and whatnot are in the description below, and again, I'd like to say thanks for 100 subscribers. It means a lot. And that's all the time I've got for today, so until next time, don't die.